Hi everyone, welcome back to Dear Younger Me. My name is Jamie and I am the host of the C2 channel. Today we are going to talk about, did you see my pink pants? Today we are going to talk about, what are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about boundaries. We're talking about boundaries, what they are, why they're important, and like examples of boundaries, and yeah, why they're necessary in our lives. So I never grew up learning about boundaries. I didn't know what they were and why they were used. And I think the first time that I had heard about boundaries was when I was in therapy a few years ago, and my counselor was telling me like, oh, like if you're having trouble with a certain person, you should set boundaries with them. And I think at first, when I first like heard it, I was like, man, like boundaries sound so mean. I don't want to do this because it feels like I'm hurting the other person. And we have come a long way from that interpretation of things, because boundaries are not mean. In fact, they help protect your relationship with other people, like other important people in your life. And it helps you love yourself. It helps you love your loved ones and respect them. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about like what boundaries are. And so boundaries are, I feel like, guidelines and things that you communicate explicitly to other people in your life. You can have boundaries for yourself. You can have boundaries with your friends, with your roommates, with your significant others, with your parents. You can have boundaries with every single person in your life. In fact, I think you should, because if you don't have boundaries, then you would just be stepping all over each other's toes, and that would not be fun for anybody. Just gotta make sure that, okay, I think we are in focus. I just want to make sure that we're in focus. And so boundaries are just kind of like rules, guidelines that you tell other people. And so they're there to make sure that you feel safe. So when a certain circumstance comes up or a situation pops up, you guys know like what to do so that you both feel safe. So like, I'll think of an example really quick. Like work boundaries, right? So let's say for work, you want to make sure that you have a good work-life balance. And so one of your boundaries might be telling your boss like, hey, I'm only okay with working overtime for X number of weeks a month, or I am very serious about when I go home. So my boundary is that I finish work exactly at 5 p.m. I don't know what your relationship with your boss is going to look like, and it might be a little bit harder in the working world, but I feel like boundaries are really important to set even in the working world, because it lets other people know that you value your time and you value yourself to stand up and actually tell others kind of like that's what your boundary is. Because a boundary is set up so that like you are safe, right? So whenever someone comes up against that boundary, it might have the potential of hurting you. So in that work example, right? Like let's say your boss or your coworkers don't respect your boundaries and they keep harassing you. They always ask you for help at 5:15. If you give in and just go ahead and help them, even though it's past your 5:15, you might start to feel a little bit irritated, and like you might not have time to go home and do all the things that you wanted to do before dinner. And so then it just like makes you feel not good inside. And so boundaries are really to let the other person know this is your limit. And it's also for you to know that this is your limit. And so why they're important. Boundaries are really important because like at any given moment, any given circumstance, people might say things or do things that hurt you. And if you don't set up boundaries for them, then they're going to keep hurting you over and over again in that scenario. One, because like either A, you just haven't told them that's kind of where your limit is, or two, they're the type of people who don't respect your boundaries and they just kind of keep crossing them over and over again. And I feel like it's really important that we talk about boundaries, because it's not being mean. Like when you tell someone like, hey, this is where I'm at and this is the extent of what I can do, like it's not you being mean, but really it's actually you loving yourself. Excuse me. And I think I had a hard time telling other people my boundaries, or even setting up boundaries for myself, because I didn't like value myself and value my time as much as I valued other people and other people's time. And so it's like, it's always good to set up boundaries, because it's really telling yourself, I don't feel safe here and I'm not going to go past a certain point. And yeah, and so I kind of just want to give some examples to kind of get the ball rolling, because it can be kind of a vague term. And so I'm trying to think. So one of the boundaries that my boyfriend and I have is we don't curse at each other. And even if we're like in a big fight, just because it's really like when you do that, it brings up a lot of negative emotions. And at that point, people are probably yelling and screaming. And we've both set that boundary because we feel like if the other person ever like yelled or like cursed at the other person, we would just feel really threatened and not loved. And in order to prevent us feeling threatened and not loved, we put a boundary in place, which is that we don't swear at each other, even when we're really angry. Another one that we have is we agree to part ways at 11 p.m. And so if I'm over there hanging out at his place, or he's over here hanging out, we do our very best to like not stay past 11 p.m. just because when you like get into the later hours of the night, I don't know what it is about it, but just like there's like sexual temptation that happens, or like you guys, like at least for us, right? Like there are things that like we did where we were like, oh my gosh, we like can't do that again. And so we put that kind of like time limit in place, and that has been really helpful. So that like even when I get home, I'm not like super tired for the next day, and I can actually get ready for work and like finish all the things that I need to do. Another boundary could be like, let's say you don't live with your parents anymore, and another boundary could be, hey, like mom, in order, like for me, right? I tell my mom, like, please don't just show up at my place and drop off food, because it irritates me and it kind of messes up my schedule. A lot of the time she would just like call and be like, hey, I'm coming over to your place and I'm dropping off food. And even though the intention behind it is because she loves me and she wants me to be well taken care of, it's like it disrupts like my day, it disrupts my rhythm. And especially if I'm working at home and I'm like editing and she just like calls and comes up, I think just, having another person enter your space can already impact you in a way that you don't realize, and sometimes it's really negative. And so I tell her like, hey, like don't come unless I give you permission to come. It's kind of like when someone comes in through your door, right? Like they knock and then you have the option to tell them like you can come in or you can't, because it's your place, it's your home, and you can decide who comes in or not. And so those are just some examples. I'm trying to think if there are other examples I want to talk about. I think another example is the things that you talk about with certain people, right? Like there's in life and relationships, my counselor showed me this, and she was saying how there are different circles of trust, and like in the inner circle is, you know, the person that you trust the most, like often it's God or like your spouse, and then, well, it should be always God in the center, but whoever you trust the most. And then on the outer circle, or the one next to it, should be like your best friends, like your 2 or 3 people who you can confide in. And as you get out into the circle, more and more people start appearing. And then when you get to the outer edges of the circle, those are the people that you kind of like don't really talk to. You don't really share deep personal information with, because they're like the clerks at Safeway. And so a boundary that you could set with specific groups of people is telling them like, hey, I'm not comfortable. Like, let's say you're talking to the store clerk, or maybe even just, let's say someone that you see on a semi-regular basis, but it's very small talk. And let's say it's the store clerk at Safeway, and you guys happen to talk about something, and it goes into something personal, and then they're like, hey, like, can we talk about, you know, your family trauma, like with your parents and stuff? And it's, I know most people don't do that, but it's like, you have to recognize that you need to give yourself the permission to say, no, I don't want to talk about it because I'm not comfortable with that. Like, frankly, I don't know you. You're a stranger. I'm not going to just give you my heart because I don't know what you're going to do with it. And so that's kind of like how you set boundaries with different people along the different circles. And so even, let's say, with my community, right? Like, let's say it's a circle that is outside of my best friends. These are just friends, like people that I see, I don't know, maybe like once a week. Even when you guys are catching up and talking about certain things, like if ever you feel like your body starts to tense up, because oftentimes our body starts to like knows what we're feeling before our mind like cognitively and consciously knows it. Like if you sense that your body is tensing up or you're like breathing really fast, listen to those cues. And if you ever get to a point in a conversation where your body does all of those things, like you can tell yourself and tell the other person like, hey, I don't feel comfortable talking about this, or like, hey, I feel like you're not supposed to be telling me about all the things that you're sharing. And so just putting those boundaries out there is really, really important, because it just protects your heart. It protects people who don't love you from kind of stamping over your heart and like trampling over it. And what I mean by that is sometimes you'll share really deep personal things with certain people that you thought you could trust, and then they go around and they like spread gossip about you or talk about you behind your back, or they just don't ever follow up. And it's hurtful. It's like hurtful to think like, oh, like I shared something so deep and personal with you, and yet you didn't really have a high regard for it. And so I think that's one way that boundaries can really protect your heart, is to help you tell yourself and the other person, I'm done talking about this and I don't want to talk about this anymore. I also want to talk about what boundaries are not. Boundaries, I feel like for me, in my experience, it's always things that I'm able to do that are like within my space, within my sphere of control, right? It's like, for the work example, like when it's 5, I'm going to leave. Boundaries are not control, and it's not manipulation. Like it is not telling the other person, if you don't do this, then I'm not going to do this. Like if you don't help me out with my homework, then I'm not going to love you. Like that's not a boundary. That's just manipulation. And so, yeah, so it's like, I'm trying to think of like another negative example. I feel like the ones that I'm thinking of are like kind of physical. So let's say this certain person, whenever you see them, they always, and it's like the opposite sex, and they always, when they give you a hug, they like rub your back for a really awkward and long time. A boundary would be telling them, hey, can you not do that? Like, don't rub my back, or better yet, just don't give them a hug. But I think control and manipulation is like, don't do that, or else well, I don't know, that's like kind of hard to say, because I feel like boundaries should also have consequences. So it's like, I don't know, should boundaries have consequences? Yes. So boundaries should have consequences, but it's not like punishment. It's not punishing the other person. So it's like, let's say you hang out with a certain person and you tell them, can we not talk about like a certain subject? And they keep bringing it up. And in fact, they keep prying it out of you. That's when you can tell yourself like, hey, like if you keep doing this, like I'm not gonna, like when they don't respect your boundaries, then I feel like it's okay to be like, hey, I don't, like, let's not meet up anymore because I don't really trust you. But it's not forcing them to do anything. It's like removing yourself out of that situation. It's not like, if you keep talking about this and I'm gonna hit you, or I'm gonna hurt you, or I'm gonna pry personal things out of you. So it's not like a retaliation method. And so, yeah. I'm like, what else do I need to talk about for boundaries? Boundaries can also be fluid. You might have a boundary that worked for you one month, 2 months, and then like the next couple months you might have to change it because circumstances have changed, or your trust level with the other person has changed, increased, decreased. And also, I just feel like it's really important to set up boundaries and ask God, like, what are good boundaries for specific people? Because oftentimes I think our little child, our subconscious, like there are little bits of and pieces of our subconscious where we know we're not comfortable with something, but we don't consciously know it. And so it's like asking God to really help you figure out like what is actually comfortable for you and what is safe for you to do when it comes to certain people. Then it's perfect because he reveals the things that are within your spirit, within your heart, so that you know those boundaries are going to be truthful and actually helpful to you. I'm like, do I have anything else I need to say? And I do want to say on the topic of having unhealthy boundaries, if you ever feel like like someone has set up a boundary and it's not realistic for you to do, or it just seems too controlling, like if you have a gut instinct about it, or it just feels uneasy, like listen to that gut instinct and listen to why your body feels like it's uneasy, because there's something there. And then you have to communicate with the other person, like, hey, I don't think I can do this. And then you guys have to talk it out or figure out if it's worth setting up new boundaries or just not to like see each other in certain situations. Oh, also, I want to tell you guys that boundaries can be physical, emotional, spiritual. So it's not just one aspect, but it can be all three. And I also want to clarify that boundaries are not forcing someone else to do something. And it's not like controlling them. Like, it's not like you can tell someone and say, okay, my boundary is if you don't see me for 4 hours today, then I'm gonna be upset. Like, that's not realistic. And also, it's not about like what makes you feel safe, and it's not what you can do, right? I feel like oftentimes, like for boundaries, you need to know what you're comfortable with, what you're willing to put up with. And so, like, let's say you have a boundary with someone and you tell them, hey, I like only have 15 minutes to talk with you today and that's it. But they just keep talking past that 15 minutes. I would say it's okay to just tell them like, hey, I have to go, and you just leave after 15 minutes because you have other things to do. But yeah, so I feel like it's mostly like what you can do in a situation, and also letting the other person know like what makes you feel safe, but it's not controlling the other person. Like just because you have a boundary set up doesn't mean that you control every little thing that they do. And it's not telling someone, hey, like you can't hang out with, like, let's say you're in a relationship and you as a girlfriend, you can't tell like your boyfriend, like, hey, I don't want you to hang out with any of your other guy friends, and I don't want you to like talk to any girls, because I think that's just really controlling. But a good boundary could be like letting them know first how you feel, which is that you don't feel like it's necessarily appropriate for your boyfriend to be like hugging other girls for really long amounts of time. And so I don't even know if that would be a boundary anymore then. I think it would just be letting them know, hey, like this bothers me. Because I think the moment you set up a boundary and say, hey, you can't hang out with that person or you can't hug that person for a certain amount of time, then it's basically control. Yeah. Okay, that's all I have. Bye guys, love you.